My brother tossed my son's birthday present against the wall, laughing as my son cried in front of the entire room. My family rolled their eyes and said, "Oh, come on, it was just a joke." Suddenly, my father stood, removed his ring, and slammed it on the table. The room went dead quiet. What he said next changed everything. "Hey, Reddit. Never thought I'd be posting here, but I need to get this off my chest. And honestly, I need to know if I went too far. Though after what happened, I don't think I did. I'm Brian, 34 male, single dad to the most amazing 8-year-old girl you'll ever meet. Her name's Sophie, and she's the only thing that's kept me going since my wife Rachel passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind where they tell you in months instead of years. The aggressive kind that takes people way too fast, leaving you standing there wondering what the hell just happened to your life and why the universe decided to rip away the best person you've ever known. We had 12 years together. Met in college, married at 24, had Sophie when we were 26. Rachel was my entire world, and watching her fade away over 8 brutal months was the hardest thing I've ever done. The chemo made her sick, the radiation made her tired, and the pain medication made her foggy. But she never complained. Never asked why her just kept fighting for every extra day she could get with Sophie. Rachel was an artist. Not the starving kind. She actually made decent money doing custom furniture restoration and woodworking. She had this little workshop in our garage where she'd spend hours bringing broken antiques back to life. People would bring her chairs with busted legs, tables with water damage, dressers that had been in families for generations. She'd work her magic and return them looking brand new, while somehow keeping all the character that made them special. But her real passion was model building ships mostly. Intricate, beautiful sailing vessels that took months to complete. She'd started the hobby in high school, taught by her grandfather who'd been in the Navy. Our house was full of them before she got sick. Tall ships with billowing sails, warships with tiny cannons, merchant vessels with detailed cargo holds. Each one displayed in a custom case she'd built herself, each one representing months of painstaking work. I used to watch her build them, amazed by her patience. She'd spend an hour getting one tiny rope pulley exactly right, then another hour painting details so small you needed a magnifying glass to see them properly. When I'd ask why she put so much effort into parts nobody would notice, she'd smile and say the ship would know. That doing things right mattered even when nobody was watching. After the diagnosis, after we'd processed the shock and the grief and the unfairness of it all, Rachel made a decision. She was going to spend every moment she had the strength for working on one final project, one last ship. Not for display, not for sale, not for herself. For Sophie. A replica of an 1800s merchant ship for Sophie's 8th birthday. Rachel knew she wouldn't be there to see it, so she poured everything she had left into making something Sophie could keep forever. She started it the week after her diagnosis. Spent 6 months on it between treatments, working through the pain and exhaustion and nausea that came in waves. The chemo made her hands shake, so she'd wait for her good hours, usually late at night, when the medication wore off enough that she could hold the tiny tools steady. Some nights I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and find her missing from bed. I'd go downstairs, and there she'd be in the workshop, hunched over her workbench, hands trembling from the medication, still carefully placing tiny brass fittings or painting delicate details on the hull, with a brush that had only 3 hairs. I'd tell her to come back to bed, that she needed rest, that the ship could wait. She'd look at me with those eyes that were already starting to look too big for her face, and say she didn't have time to wait, that every day she felt strong enough to work was a gift she was giving Sophie, that she needed to finish it before she got too weak to hold the tools. The ship was a masterpiece, 18 inches long, every single plank hand-carved from basswood she'd been saving for a special project. The sails were made from vintage linen Rachel had found at an estate sale years ago, carefully cut and sewn with stitches so small they looked like they'd been done by machine. The rigging was done with actual rope she'd waxed herself, each line running through tiny brass pulleys she'd ordered from a specialty supplier in England. She'd researched everything, spent hours on her laptop looking at historical documents, studying photographs of actual merchant ships from the 1800s, making sure every detail was period accurate. The tiny cargo barrels on the deck were hand-turned on a miniature lathe. The ship's wheel had spokes so thin they looked like they'd break if you breathed on them. Even the anchor was functional, with a tiny chain that actually raised and lowered it. The hull alone took her 3 months. She'd carved each plank individually, then spent weeks staining them in graduated shades so they looked weathered by years at sea. When the nausea got too bad to work, she'd just sit in the workshop holding pieces of the ship, running her fingers over the wood, planning what she'd do next when she felt better. She'd even made a custom glass display case for it, with dovetailed corners and a solid walnut base. She was so weak by then that I had to help her cut the wood, but she insisted on doing all the joinery herself, said it had to be perfect because this was the last thing she'd ever make. The brass plaque was the final touch, engraved by a local shop with words Rachel had spent days perfecting. For my brave Captain Sophie, sail toward your dreams. Love always, Mom. Rachel finished it 3 weeks before she died. I'd come home from work one evening and found her in the workshop, the ship sealed in its case, sitting on the workbench under the lights. She was crying, but smiling too. Said it was done, said it was perfect, said Sophie would love it. Made me promise I'd give it to Sophie on her 8th birthday, no matter what not before. She wanted Sophie to be old enough to understand what it meant, to appreciate the work that went into it. Not after. She wanted the birthday to be special, wanted Sophie to know her mom had been thinking about her future even when she was dying. Said she wanted Sophie to have something beautiful to remember her by. Something that showed how much time and love she'd put into being her mom. Something that proved even when she couldn't be there physically, she'd done everything possible to leave a piece of herself behind. I kept that ship in my closet for 2 years, wrapped in soft cloth, waiting for the right day. Sophie's birthday was last month, and I'd been planning this whole thing. Small party, just family, with the ship as the centerpiece. I knew Sophie would love it. She'd been asking about her mom's workshop, wanting to learn woodworking, talking about how she wanted to make things with her hands like her mom did. Everything was perfect until my brother showed up. Tyler is 31 and has never grown out of being the golden child who thinks consequences don't apply to him. Our parents had 2 kids, me, the responsible one who got a regular job and started a family, and Tyler, the free spirit who's been bouncing between failed business ventures and living situations his entire adult life. The favoritism started early. I had strict curfews, had to maintain perfect grades, worked part-time to pay for my car insurance. Tyler rolled in whenever he felt like it, barely passed his classes, had every expense covered because he was finding himself. He's the kind of guy who shows up to family events empty-handed, but leaves with leftovers and gas money. The kind who borrows tools and never returns them. I've lost 3 power drills and my grandfather's vintage level to Tyler's black hole. The kind who thinks his charm will get him out of any situation because it always has. Our parents enable him completely. When Tyler got fired from 3 jobs in 1 year, it was because managers didn't understand his creative approach. When he totaled his car doing 90 in a 45 and couldn't afford another one, they bought him a newer model than mine. When he got evicted for spending rent money on Vegas, they let him move back home rent-free at 30 while I'd been paying my own way since 18. The business ventures are always the same story. Tyler gets excited about some idea, drop shipping, crypto trading, a food truck, convinces our parents it's his big break, takes money as investment capital, runs it into the ground, moves to the next sure thing. Last I counted, Mom and Dad had sunk over $60,000 into Tyler's ventures. Not one ever made a dime back. The pattern was always the same. Tyler screws up, Mom makes excuses, Dad writes a check, and I'm supposed to accept this is how our family works. When I pointed out the unfairness, I was being selfish or not understanding Tyler's struggles. When Rachel and I bought our first house, we saved for years and got towels from Target as a housewarming gift. When Tyler wanted to start his food truck, they gave him $25 grand as a loan everyone knew would never be repaid. When Rachel got sick, Tyler visited the hospital once, stayed 15 minutes checking his phone, said hospitals made him uncomfortable, and left, never came back. Didn't come to the funeral because he had a business opportunity. Sent a sorry for your loss text 3 days after we buried her. But this was Sophie's birthday. I thought even Tyler wouldn't mess this up. I'd learned to keep my distance. Minimal contact, surface-level politeness at family gatherings, never letting him know anything important about my life because he'd find a way to ruin it or make it about himself. But this was Sophie's birthday. I thought even Tyler wouldn't mess that up. The party was small. My parents, my Aunt Lisa, Sophie's best friend from school, and her mom, and unfortunately, Tyler. I'd tried not inviting him, but Mom had insisted he'd be devastated to miss his niece's birthday. Threatened not to come herself if I excluded him. So I caved, like I always did with them. Everything was going fine. Sophie was happy, running around with her friend, excited about presents. We'd done cake, played some games, and I was getting ready for the big moment. I brought out the display case, still covered with a cloth, and set it on the table. The room got quiet. Everyone knew what was coming. My Aunt Lisa had tears in her eyes. Even Sophie's friend's mom looked emotional, and she'd never met Rachel. I knelt down next to Sophie, and told her this present was special, that her mom had made it just for her, working on it for months, putting all her love into every detail. Sophie's eyes were huge, and I could see her trying not to cry because she's 8 and still thinks crying isn't cool. I pulled off the cloth. The ship was even more beautiful than I remembered. The afternoon light coming through the window made the brass fittings glow. The white sails looked like they could actually catch wind. Every detail was perfect, exactly as Rachel had intended. Sophie just stared at it, not saying anything. Then she whispered, "Mom made this for me?" And I nodded, not trusting my voice. She reached out carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear, and touched the glass case with the gentlest fingers. That's when Tyler decided to open his mouth. "Wow, that's really something," he said, walking over to get a closer look. "Must have taken forever. Too bad she wasted all that time on something so fragile." The room went cold. My Aunt Lisa actually gasped. But before anyone could respond, Tyler reached out and picked up the case, just grabbed it, even though Sophie was still touching it, even though it clearly wasn't meant to be handled like that. I stood up fast, told him to put it down. "Be careful with it. That's not a toy." Tyler laughed, actually laughed, said he was just looking at it. What was my problem? Did I think he was going to break it? Then he tilted the case, watching the ship slide around inside. Sophie made this little sound, like a scared animal, and reached for the case. Tyler lifted it higher, out of her reach, still tilting it around like it was a snow globe. I wasn't polite anymore. I told him to put it down right now. My voice had that edge that makes people who know me back off. But Tyler's never been great at reading rooms. He said I was being dramatic. It was just a model ship. Rachel would have wanted people to actually appreciate it, not keep it locked away like some museum piece. That's when I knew he was going to drop it. I could see it in his face. That look he gets when he's about to do something terrible and pretend it was an accident. The same look he had when he accidentally deleted my college application essays. When he accidentally told my high school girlfriend I was cheating on her. When he accidentally crashed my car and blamed it on faulty brakes, I lunged for the case, but Tyler stepped back, still holding it up, grinning now because he knew he had everyone's attention. Said I needed to relax, learn to share, not be so possessive of things. Sophie was crying now, begging him to give it back. My mom was saying Tyler's name in that warning tone that never actually led to consequences. My dad was frozen, as usual, unwilling to actually discipline his precious baby boy. Then Tyler's foot caught on the edge of the carpet. I don't think he meant to fall, but he did, stumbling backward, arms windmilling, the display case flying out of his hands in a perfect arc. It hit the hardwood floor and exploded. The sound was like a car crash in miniature. Glass everywhere. The ship breaking apart, masts snapping, hull cracking, 2 years of Rachel's love, and 6 months of her dying effort scattering across my living room floor in 1,000 pieces. Sophie screamed. Actually screamed, this sound of pure anguish that I'll hear in my nightmares forever. She dropped to the floor, trying to gather the pieces, cutting her hands on the glass, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I scooped her up before she could hurt herself worse, held her while she cried into my shoulder, her whole body shaking. Over her head, I could see Tyler standing there, brushing glass off his jeans, looking more annoyed than sorry. My Aunt Lisa was on her knees trying to salvage pieces. Sophie's friend and her mom were already quietly leaving, understanding this party was over. My parents stood there in shock. Dad pale as a ghost, Mom with her hand over her mouth. Tyler brushed off his hands and had the nerve to say accidents happen. Said it wasn't his fault the floor was uneven, that I shouldn't have made such a big deal about a toy boat, that Sophie was overreacting and needed to learn that things break sometimes. A toy boat. He called Rachel's final gift to our daughter a toy boat. I told everyone to leave, right then. Get out of my house. Tyler started to argue, but something in my face made even him shut up. My dad tried to stay, said we should talk about this, but I repeated myself. Out, now. My mom was crying, saying Tyler didn't mean it, that we all needed to calm down and discuss this like adults. I told her Tyler just destroyed the last thing my dead wife made for her daughter and then called it a toy. There was nothing to discuss. Aunt Lisa offered to stay and help clean up, but I needed everyone gone. Needed to focus on Sophie, who was still crying in my arms, still trying to see the pieces of the ship over my shoulder. They left. Tyler was still making excuses as Dad herded him out the door. Something about how I was being unreasonable, how it was just an accident, how I always overreacted to everything he did after they left. I sat with Sophie on the couch for 3 hours. She cried until she made herself sick, threw up twice, then cried more. Kept saying she wanted her mom, wanted the ship back, wanted to see what it looked like before it broke, asked me over and over why Uncle Tyler would do that, why he would break something Mom made special for her. I didn't have good answers. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that some people are just selfish? That some adults never grow out of being children? That her uncle cared more about being the center of attention than about her feelings? I tried to explain that we could fix it, that we'd glue every piece back together, that it would still be special. But Sophie wasn't stupid. She'd seen it shatter. She'd watched her mother's final gift explode across the floor while Tyler made excuses. She knew it would never be the same. She knew her mom's gift was destroyed, and no amount of glue would bring back what Tyler had taken from her. The worst part was watching her blame herself. She kept saying if she'd held onto it tighter, if she'd been braver and fought Tyler for it, if she hadn't cried and made him nervous, maybe it wouldn't have broken. An 8-year-old shouldn't have to feel responsible for an adult's behavior. But there she was, taking the weight of Tyler's carelessness onto her tiny shoulders. I held her and told her it wasn't her fault, would never be her fault, that Tyler was the only person responsible for what happened. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. How could she? The adults in her life were supposed to protect her, and instead, one of them had destroyed her most precious possession while the others watched. When she finally fell asleep on the couch around 9 p.m., exhausted from crying, her face was swollen and blotchy. I carried her upstairs to bed, tucked her in with her favorite stuffed rabbit, the one Rachel had made her when she was 2, and watched her sleep for a while. Even in sleep, she looked sad, little frown lines between her eyebrows, like she was having bad dreams. Then I went back downstairs and looked at the wreckage. The living room looked like a crime scene. Glass everywhere, catching the light from the lamps. Pieces of the ship scattered across the floor in a radius of about 6 feet from the impact point. The white sails torn and crumpled. Tiny brass fittings everywhere, some bent beyond recognition. The masts snapped clean in half, the rigging tangled into knots. I spent 4 hours picking up pieces, working in silence except for the sound of glass clinking into the trash bag. I separated what could potentially be salvaged from what was destroyed beyond repair. Used tweezers to pick up the smallest brass fittings, stored them in Ziploc bags. Carefully collected every splinter of the masts, every scrap of sail, every fragment of the hull. The main hull was cracked in 3 places, running along the plank lines where Rachel had spent weeks getting the wood grain to line up perfectly. Both masts were snapped clean through. The bowsprit, the long pole that stuck out from the front, was in 4 pieces. The sails were torn and stained with dirt from the floor. The brass fittings were scattered everywhere, some bent, some crushed, some missing entirely, despite my careful search. The display case was a total loss. The glass had shattered into thousands of pieces, too small to salvage. The walnut base was cracked where it hit the floor. The corners where Rachel had done those perfect dovetail joints were split. The plaque survived intact, miraculously. For my brave Captain Sophie, sail toward your dreams. Love always, Mom. The brass had a small dent in one corner, but the words were still clear. I held it in my hands and felt something inside me break in a way that had nothing to do with wood and glass. This was Rachel's last gift, her final message to our daughter. 6 months of work while she was dying, every spare hour she could manage, every moment when the pain wasn't too bad and her hands were steady enough to work, and Tyler had destroyed it in 15 seconds of thoughtless arrogance. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by the ruins of Rachel's final gift and made a decision. Tyler had been getting away with this his whole life, breaking things, hurting people, walking away while everyone else cleaned up his messes. Always protected, always excused, never facing real consequences. When he deleted my college essays, Dad bought me a new computer and told me to work harder on backups. When he told my girlfriend I was cheating, Mom said boys would be boys and I should have picked a girl who trusted me more. When he crashed my car, they paid for repairs and told me I should be grateful he wasn't hurt. Every time, the message was the same. Tyler's comfort and happiness mattered more than my pain. Tyler's excuses mattered more than my losses. Tyler deserved protection, and I deserved to shut up and deal with it. Not this time. This time, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He'd hurt my daughter. He'd destroyed her connection to her dead mother. And he'd laughed about it. If my parents weren't going to hold him accountable, I would. And I knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, my phone was full of messages. Mom saying Tyler felt terrible and didn't mean for it to break. Dad saying I was being too harsh and needed to forgive family mistakes. Tyler himself sent a text saying he'd chip in for a replacement if I found something similar online. Like Rachel's months of work could be replaced with an Amazon purchase, I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called my Aunt Lisa. Lisa was my mom's sister, but unlike my parents, she actually saw Tyler for what he was. She'd been calling him out for years, which is why she wasn't invited to as many family events anymore. But she loved Sophie, and she'd been there to see the devastation firsthand. I asked her a question. What's the most important thing to Tyler? What does he actually care about? She didn't even hesitate. His motorcycle, a vintage 1970 Triumph Bonneville that he'd inherited from our grandfather 5 years ago. It was the only thing Tyler had ever actually taken care of, the only possession he treated with respect. He spent every spare dollar on it, spent hours cleaning and maintaining it, showed it off to anyone who'd listen. Our grandfather had been a motorcycle enthusiast, and that bike was his pride and joy. When he died, the will specifically left it to Tyler because they'd bonded over it. Tyler actually cried at the reading of the will, one of the few genuine emotions I'd ever seen from him. He kept it in our parents' garage, under a custom cover, polished and maintained like a museum piece. Bragged about how it was worth over $20,000, how he'd never sell it, how it was his connection to Grandpa Perfect. I asked Lisa if she still had the spare key to our parents' house. She did. Mom had given her one years ago for emergencies. I asked if she'd be willing to let me borrow it for a few hours while they were all out of the house. She was quiet for a moment, then asked what I was planning. I told her. She was quiet again, longer this time. Then she said she'd be over in 20 minutes with the key. 3 days later, I got my chance. My parents had mentioned they were taking Tyler to some motorcycle show 2 hours away, leaving early Saturday morning. They'd invited me and Sophie, obviously not reading the room about why we might not want to hang out with Tyler right now. I waited until I saw Dad's car pull out of the driveway with Tyler's truck following behind. Gave it another 30 minutes to make sure they were really gone. Then I drove to their house with a toolbox, a tarp, and a very specific plan. The garage code hadn't changed in 10 years. My birthday, 0824. Inside, Tyler's Triumph sat in the center spot like a shrine. Mom and Dad had moved their cars to the driveway to give it prime real estate, covered with a custom $200 fitted cover. He had a pegboard of specialized tools, just for that bike. Metric wrenches, torque wrenches, special screwdrivers. A rolling toolbox dedicated entirely to motorcycle maintenance, organized with the kind of care Tyler never showed anything else. I pulled off the cover, slowly, carefully. Underneath, the Triumph gleamed even in the dim garage light. The bike really was beautiful. Glossy black paint with gold custom pinstriping chrome that reflected like a mirror from hours of weekly polishing. Leather seats soft as butter. Vintage badges on the tank, original to 1970. Every piece perfectly maintained. Our grandfather had bought this bike new in 1970, rode it for 40 years. When he died, his will specifically mentioned the Triumph. Left it to Tyler with a note about how they'd bonded over it, how he trusted Tyler to take care of it. Tyler actually cried at the will reading, said he'd make sure it stayed perfect, that he'd honor Grandpa by taking care of it the way Grandpa had. And for once, Tyler had kept his word. That bike was the only thing he'd ever truly maintained. He'd shown it off at vintage meets, won awards for its condition. It was literally the only thing in the world Tyler actually cared about, which made it perfect. For a second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered Sophie's face, remembered her screaming, remembered Tyler calling her mother's gift a toy while she cried. I got to work. I didn't smash it with a hammer or pour sugar in the tank. That would be too obvious. Instead, I methodically disassembled critical components and took them with me, creating damage that would look like mechanical failure. First, the carburetor. Tyler's Triumph had the original Amal carburetor, impossible to replace except with another vintage part. I disconnected the fuel line, unbolted it from the intake manifold, and wrapped it in a shop towel. Next, the ignition coil, another expensive vintage part. Then the starter motor, timing chain tensioner, oil pump, critical gaskets. Each piece carefully removed, each absence that would cause serious problems. The custom exhaust system Tyler had paid $3,000 for came off piece by piece, added it to my growing pile. Then I got creative, used a screwdriver to carefully scratch away paint in hidden spots underneath the seat, along the frame's underside, inside the toolbox compartment. Not deep, just enough to break through paint to bare metal. In months, those spots would rust, spreading beneath the paint. I bent the kickstand slightly. Not enough to break it, but enough that the bike wouldn't sit level. Tyler would notice every time he parked it. I loosened bolts throughout the bike. The front brake assembly, just enough to develop play over time, making brakes feel mushy chain guard, mounting bolts. They'd vibrate free, making rattling noises. Handlebar mounting bolts, barely loose, creating a wobble at speed. None would cause immediate catastrophic failure, but together, they'd make the bike feel wrong in ways Tyler couldn't identify. The gas tank got corn syrup mixed with gasoline, not pure sugar. Too obvious. The corn syrup would gradually gum up the fuel system, causing misfires, rough running, carbon buildup. It would take weeks to manifest fully. For the final touch, I cut small holes in his custom cover with my utility knife. One near the seat where rain could pool, one over the gas tank cap, one at the bottom for dust. All in places Tyler wouldn't see unless really looking. The whole operation took 90 minutes. I packed the parts into a cardboard box from Dad's recycling, carried it to my truck, put the holy cover back exactly as Tyler always left it. Made sure the garage looked completely undisturbed. Then I locked up, reset the alarm, and drove away. Back home, I took the motorcycle parts to a scrapyard 3 towns over. Told them I was clearing out a garage, got $40 and watched them toss Tyler's precious carburetor into a pile of metal scrap. Then I went home, hugged Sophie, and waited. Took 2 weeks for the first complaint. Tyler texted the family group chat that his bike was running rough, said he couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. It was losing power and making weird sounds. Dad offered to help him look at it. A few days later, another text. The mechanic said there were parts missing and damage to the fuel system. Tyler was sure the shop was trying to scam him because he'd just had everything serviced and the bike had been under a cover in the garage. My mom called me, asked if I knew anything about it, said Tyler was convinced someone had messed with his bike, that the damage was too specific to be random. I told her that was terrible, hoped he could get it fixed. A week after that, Tyler showed up at my door. I watched him through the peephole, saw him pacing on my porch, working up the nerve to knock. When he finally did, I let him wait a full minute before opening the door. He looked rough. Hadn't been sleeping well, clearly. He started talking fast, saying he knew I was mad about the ship, but this had gone too far. His bike was ruined, thousands of dollars in damage, parts that couldn't be replaced easily. He knew I did something to it. I asked him if he had any proof he didn't. Said it was obvious. Too much of a coincidence. The damage was too deliberate. I told him that sounded paranoid. Maybe he hadn't maintained it as well as he thought. Maybe someone at that motorcycle show had messed with it. Maybe it was just bad luck. He got angry then. Started yelling about how that bike was from Grandpa, how it was important to him, how I had no right to touch his things. I let him yell himself out, watching him with the same expression I'd worn while he destroyed Sophie's ship. When he finally stopped, I spoke very calmly. Told him I had no idea what he was talking about, but I found it interesting that he understood how it felt to lose something irreplaceable. Something that connected him to someone he loved. Something he could never get back. His face changed. The anger drained away. Replaced by this dawning realization, I continued. Said it was unfortunate about his bike. Really was. But accidents happen, right? Things break sometimes. He shouldn't be so possessive of material objects. Maybe this was a learning experience about how fragile important things could be. Used his exact words back at him. Watched them hit like physical blows. Tyler's voice shook when he asked if I was seriously admitting to destroying his bike over a model ship. I told him I wasn't admitting anything. I had no idea what happened to his bike. But I did know what happened to my daughter's ship. I'd watched that happen. Watched him laugh about it. He threatened to go to the police. I suggested he try it. Tell them his vintage motorcycle mysteriously developed problems while sitting in a locked garage. And he thought his brother did it, but had zero evidence. See how far that got him. Tyler stood there opening and closing his mouth, finally understanding what checkmate felt like. He couldn't prove anything. The parts were gone. Untraceable. The damage looked like it could have been from poor maintenance or bad luck. And even if he somehow proved I did it, he'd have to admit why I might have been motivated to do it, which meant admitting what he did to Sophie. He left without another word. Later that day, my mom called. She was crying, saying Tyler was devastated about his bike, that it was all he had left of Grandpa, that I needed to tell her the truth about whether I'd done something. I asked her if she remembered what Tyler destroyed at Sophie's birthday party. She said that was different. It was an accident. He hadn't meant it. I asked her how Sophie was supposed to know her uncle hadn't meant to destroy the last thing her mother ever made for her. How an 8-year-old was supposed to understand the difference between accident and didn't care enough to be careful. She went quiet. I continued. Told her Tyler had spent his entire life breaking things and having other people fix the consequences. He'd broken my things, my relationships, my trust, and now my daughter's heart. And every time she and Dad had cleaned up after him, made excuses, demanded everyone else forgive and forget. But I wasn't everyone else anymore. I was a father protecting his child. and Tyler had finally broken something that couldn't be fixed with money or apologies. Mom tried to argue, said family forgives family, that holding grudges would only hurt me in the end, that I was teaching Sophie the wrong lessons about revenge and anger. I told her she was right about one thing. I was teaching Sophie a lesson. I was teaching her that when someone hurts you, when someone destroys something precious and shows no remorse, you don't have to smile and forgive them. You don't have to let them keep hurting you just because they're family. I was teaching her that her feelings matter, that her grief matters, that the people who love her will protect her, even if it means cutting off people who can't be trusted. I was teaching her that she doesn't have to accept being treated badly just to keep the peace. Mom said I was being cruel. I asked if she thought Tyler was cruel when he grabbed that ship out of Sophie's hands, when he held it over her head while she begged, when he called her mother's work a toy while she cried. She didn't answer. I told her I loved her and Dad, but until they could acknowledge what Tyler actually did, not the accident of dropping it, but the deliberate cruelty of how he treated Sophie's gift, we were done. Sophie and I would be skipping family gatherings. They were welcome to visit us, but Tyler wasn't allowed in my home anymore. She started crying harder, saying I was tearing the family apart. I pointed out Tyler had done that when he destroyed my daughter's ship and laughed about it. I was just making sure he couldn't do it again. That was 3 weeks ago. Tyler's bike is apparently totaled. The combination of missing parts, fuel system damage, and loosened components caused a cascading mechanical failure. From what Aunt Lisa told me, it happened gradually. First, Tyler noticed rough running after the show. Took it to his mechanic, who couldn't find anything obviously wrong. Charged him $200 for diagnostics. A week later, the problems got worse. Engine misfiring, losing power, making weird sounds. The mechanic found missing parts and fuel system damage. Showed Tyler where components should be, but weren't. Tyler accused the shop of stealing parts, trying to scam him. The mechanic told Tyler to take his bike elsewhere, so he did, loading it into Dad's truck and trying another shop an hour away. The second mechanic found more problems. Loosened bolts, paint scratches, holes in the cover. Gave Tyler an estimate, $12,000 to replace parts, rebuild the fuel system, fix the damage. And even then, the bike would never be quite right. Tyler tried filing an insurance claim. The investigator called it suspicious. Too much specific damage. Too many missing parts. They suspected Tyler might have done it himself for the payout claim denied. Dad offered to loan Tyler the repair money, but Mom shut that down. Done throwing money after Tyler's problems, she said. The shop bills were already mounting. The bike sat in Dad's garage getting more quotes, none under 10 grand. Tyler called every Triumph specialist within 200 miles. Same answer. Parts that old were rare and expensive. The custom exhaust alone would cost $4,000 to remake. The original carburetor? Maybe 3 grand at auction if he was lucky. Tyler's dream of restoring it faded. Eventually, he accepted reality. The bike worth $20,000 was now worth maybe $3 in parts. He sold it to a restoration specialist in Tennessee for $2,800. Had to pay $400 to ship it. Ended up with $2,400 for a bike that had been his only genuine connection to our grandfather. The day after the bike shipped, Tyler showed up at my door looking terrible. Hadn't been sleeping well. The cockiness gone. Replaced by genuine defeat. When I opened the door, words came out in a rush. He knew I was mad about the ship. He got that. But this had gone too far. His bike was ruined, parts irreplaceable. He knew I did something to it. I let him talk himself out. I asked him very calmly if he had any proof, any evidence, any cameras, witnesses, anything beyond gut feeling and timing. He didn't. I told him that sounded paranoid. Maybe he hadn't maintained it as well as he thought. Maybe someone at the show messed with it. Maybe just bad luck. Mechanical failures cascading. He started yelling then about how that bike was from Grandpa, how it was important to him, how I had no right to touch his things. I let him yell himself out. When he finally stopped, breathing hard, I spoke very calmly. Told him I found it interesting he understood how it felt to lose something irreplaceable, something connecting him to someone he loved, something he could never get back. His face changed as the words sank in. I continued. Said it was unfortunate about his bike. But accidents happen, right? Things break sometimes. He shouldn't be so possessive. Maybe this was a learning experience about how fragile important things could be. Maybe he should just get over it. Used his exact words from the party, every single one. Watched them hit like physical blows. His voice shook when he asked if I was seriously admitting to destroying his bike over a model ship over a toy. I told him I wasn't admitting anything. Mechanical problems happen to vintage vehicles. But I did know what happened to my daughter's ship. I'd watched him grab it from her hands, wave it around, hold it over her head while she begged, laugh about how fragile it was. I'd watched him break my daughter's heart and call Rachel's dying gift a waste of time. So no, couldn't help him with bike problems. But I hoped he'd learn something about how it feels when someone destroys something you love and tells you to get over it. Tyler threatened to go to the police. I suggested he try it. Tell them his vintage motorcycle mysteriously developed problems in a locked garage, and he thought his brother did it, but had zero evidence. See how seriously they took that. I pointed out that even if he proved I'd been in that garage, which he couldn't, he'd have to explain why, which meant admitting publicly what he did to an 8-year-old's birthday present from her dead mother. See how that played out. See how family court would view it if I pursued a restraining order based on his behavior around my child. Tyler stood there opening and closing his mouth, finally understanding checkmate. He couldn't prove anything. The parts were untraceable. The damage looked like poor maintenance or bad luck. And even if he proved I did it, the why would destroy his reputation. He left without another word. Walked to his car with slumped shoulders, looking smaller. Drove away without the usual engine roar. I closed the door, and that was it. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.